This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. St. Louis has its signature food items. We've got our own pizza, we've got toasted ravioli, and we mustn't forget the St. Paul sandwich. But STL's dining scene offers a great deal more. The sheer variety of cuisines and cultures you can enjoy in St. Louis, nibble by nibble, sip by sip, is something we talk about a lot on this show. And last year, we explored a hidden gem serving food out of an Olivet gas station. We heard about multiple restaurants making marvelous Mexican mole and even tasted caviar harvested from the Mississippi River. Now, what we don't talk about are Michelin stars, and that's partly because St. Louis doesn't have any restaurants in the vaunted Michelin Guide. But does that matter? And in any case, what is the reason there's not a single such restaurant in STL or in the entire state of Missouri? Those questions are at the center of a story from St. Louis Public Radio's own morning newscaster, Abby Llorico. And she's sitting right here with me now. Abby, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Elaine, good to be talking about food with you on the radio this time instead of just in passing in the newsroom.
Right. And Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
So let's start with some basics here. Your story, it starts out by talking about the Michelin Guide and the way it's, quote, maintained authority over elevated dining. Abby, what is the Michelin Guide, and why is a company that is known for tires associated with fine dining?
Yeah, well, that's actually a question a lot of people first have is it the same Michelin? And the answer is yes, started by the same folks, because back in the 1880s, the French brothers who founded this tire company wanted to also promote driving and across the country of France. And how would they do that? By giving you places to drive. And so they started trying to create these guides to encourage people to hit the road. If you hit the road, you need their tires. Right. Restaurants were one way that they could get people to do that. And by the 20s, this star system was born, and it's largely remained the same today, which is one of the highest culinary honors to even achieve 1 star, but it's 1, 2, and 3 stars. You may be familiar with them from whether you've eaten one or not. If you've watched any television show or film, fiction or nonfiction, it's kind of a white whale character, the Michelin Guide in and of itself, for so many of these restaurant folks.
So what is it that got you interested in exploring this idea about the relationship between Michelin stars and a city's food status?
In December, Michelin actually released its most recent lists for U.S. cities, which included Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago. And I moved back here home to St. Louis from Washington, D.C., and the Michelin Guide is kind of a big deal there. And people talk about the food scene there with kind of people take one side or the other, and a lot of people aren't quite sure it deserves a food city type of reputation. Meanwhile, here in St. Louis, all sorts of people want to talk about St. Louis being a food scene, whether it's someone who's lived here for a long time or somebody who's visited and gotten to enjoy one of our wonderful restaurants. And you'll regularly hear from people, whether it's on a message board or I've had people personally ask me, well, where are the Michelin starred restaurants here? I want a really good meal. What about a Michelin restaurant? And the fact that they don't exist here, coupled with this idea that St. Louis is continuing to promote itself on the national and international scene, as a food destination, kind of made me wonder, what does that really mean for the folks who are doing the hard work here? I think food stories are so interesting because they're always about the people, right? They're about the people who do that hard work, and to put all that work into something where the Michelin star can't actually be a reward at the end of it. What do they think about that? And I just wanted to explore that a little bit.
So, I mean, St. Louis food, and you as someone who is from St. Louis and you've lived in other places, you could have paused, sort of, you could have focused, that is, on something that is a little more positive, so to speak. So why focus on something that St. Louis does not have?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially because we do have a lot of recognition from the James Beard Foundation. We have Food and Wine will regularly include St. Louis in its lists. We get shout outs as hidden gems, and you hear about these kind of things. So I think it's interesting because you mentioned there, Elaine, I am a St. Louisan, and so St. Louisans often focus on what we don't have, right? I mean, maybe that was just the way into exploring, but let's talk about what we do have. And I think that is an entree, if you will, into all sorts of conversations we could be having as a St. Louis region. Is we don't have this, but here's what we do have, and here's why actually you might think it's a bad thing, but it might actually be okay.
Okay. So you spoke to a number of restaurateurs for this story, Abby, and some spoke off record. Were they bothered by the lack of attention from the folks at the Michelin Guide?
On and off the record, resounding no, that's fine with them. One of the great things about the St. Louis food scene is the fact that we have folks who leave St. Louis and are taught and trained and spend so much time working in these Michelin-starred, sometimes kitchens, and then they bring them back to St. Louis. And they are able to be more scrappy, more creative, and more collaborative. And also, there is the financial aspect of it where Michelin winds up, costing a little bit of money.
Yeah. And we'll get to that in a moment. I want to make sure you talked about people. And one of the people that you spoke with is Chef Logan Ely. And Logan cooked in Michelin-starred kitchens before coming to St. Louis. And he questioned whether bringing Michelin guides to St. Louis would actually be worth that money that you were talking about.
In a city like St. Louis, you could drive around for 10 minutes and find 10 really good things to spend money on from the city's perspective, whether it's the police force or schools or kids or unhoused or whatever. And I think if you want to talk about spending money on getting something here to hand out stars, which there would be a handful of places that get a star for sure. Does that bring in more money? I don't know.
And again, that's Chef Logan Ely. Abby, does Logan have a point? And maybe to get into that, the dollars.
Yeah.
What does money have to do with this all?
I think his point was proven by the fact that several others said much the same. And they said that if the city was going to put money into something like the Michelin Guide, which I'll get to, yes, then they'd rather see money into infrastructure, streets, safety, the kind of things that would draw people not just from around the country, but even from our outer suburbs to come to the neighborhoods where their restaurants are located. And the money there, though Michelin, which did not, by the way, respond to requests for comment on this story, they're famously elusive. They don't like to talk to any media, local or national. But they have insisted in the past that it's not a pay-to-play model. It's to kind of help offset the cost of the review process since inspectors aren't allowed to get a free meal. However, that's largely how it's seen. You're talking about Texas, where tourism associations spent a total of nearly $3 million for their restaurants in certain cities, by the way, to be considered, or Colorado, where they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for a few cities to be checked out. But while Denver is getting a look, for example, Aurora, which is right nearby, is not. And they're paying all this money for what some folks, especially if you talk to the locals who are usually the best people to get restaurant recommendations from, are like, it doesn't actually cover anything. So it's seen as a pay-to-play model that a lot of folks say, even when we're talking about big dollars in the St. Louis area, and all sorts of things that they could be spent on, whether it's Rams money, ARPA money, or just more the type of tourism dollars. Michelin's not really on the top of anyone's list.
Yeah. And before the show, you and I had talked about the way that the circumscription of areas that the Michelin Guide is actually focusing on. So it might not even be all of St. Louis City.
Right. Or it might be St. Louis City, but not Clayton, or St. Charles City, but not Cottleville. And what would that leave off the table, if you will? way more than I think the St. Louis people who know the St. Louis food scene would want to see getting the kind of attention that something Michelin could bring. That was a pretty resounding response as well from folks I talked to.
So I'd like to introduce another voice to this discussion of Michelin stars. We have in studio Cheryl Baehr. And Cheryl is a food writer with St. Louis Magazine and returning to our show. Cheryl, great to see you.
It's good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So you do not award stars, but you have spent many years reviewing restaurants. On a scale from 1 to 5, we won't do the 1 to 3 because that's how many stars you can get with Michelin. On a scale from 1 to 5, how excited would you be to see a Michelin-starred restaurant in St. Louis?
I'd say probably a 2. I would be excited to see one. I think it would be thrilling. However, I'm not sure that, as we were discussing, it's worth what you need to do in order to get that. I agree with Chef Logan that I think there's a lot better ways that we could spend that sort of money rather than just advocating for ourselves in that manner. We can advocate in so many other ways, which we do a really great job of. So it would be fun to see, but I don't think our food scene's riding on it.
Yeah. Have you been to a Michelin restaurant anywhere else outside St. Louis? Obviously?
So sadly, and as someone, I was a food critic for 11 years, and but sadly, I have not been to a Michelin-starred restaurant. I've been to great restaurants in other cities, but I haven't. And I think, as Abby was saying earlier, when you think about what makes a great restaurant, it's the stories. I always find myself gravitating toward maybe the places that wouldn't be on a Michelin-starred list. Or wouldn't be Michelin-starred. The little mom and pop places, the little, quirky spots where, you don't even know how to categorize them. Those are the things that excite me. So, that it's something that I would love to experience, but have not yet, sadly. So.
I mean, it seems to speak to a certain sensibility about the food and what you are experiencing beyond what you put in your mouth or that is on the plate. Abby, you've been to Michelin-starred restaurants, right?
Yes, I have in Washington, D.C. Went to several. I will say if you're in D.C. and you can stop at Rose's Luxury, it's wonderful. But I also would recommend the Bib Gourmand list. If you go to a Michelin-starred city, that is the lower price point Michelin restaurants. And they will include the more mom and pop type of places. But that, Cheryl, you bring up a great point. That is another reason, besides just the city money. If Michelin decided, hey, we're going to scout St. Louis for free, it still concerns some chefs and restaurateurs because they'd say, well, would that make us all the same? And one of the beautiful things about this food scene here in St. Louis is the creativity people bring.
What is it that makes a Michelin restaurant Michelin worthy, Abby?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me this, and I didn't freshen up on the criteria, but it's consistency. It's the way that the chef's training translates into the meals. They have a very specific set of criteria that they look at, and sometimes it takes critics a couple times, or these inspectors, a few times of stopping by a restaurant, and several will go, and they all have to agree that it's worthy of a star. And then that happens every single year. So a restaurant can get a star one year and not the next. A restaurant can get 2 stars one year and not the next. So,
Cheryl, in all your years of working as a food critic, how would you say what you are doing, to put a finer point on it, what you're doing is different from what those folks who are assigning stars with Michelin are engaged in?
One thing I think about the Michelin system, and it's a great system, I think the restaurants tend to look very similar, though. And in fact, that's a criticism of them, is there becomes almost this like flattening of what dining means. Think of tweezer restaurant. People talk about tweezer
It's always a
plating
tweezer
lot.
restaurant.
Yes, exactly. They're always a tweezer restaurant. Exactly.
People using tweezers to place elements on a plate.
Okay. Like when you think of like the little edible flowers or a little herb perfectly placed. And that tends to be almost a caricature of a Michelin restaurant. If you've seen The Bear and some of those flashback scenes in there, it's very similar to that. What I always did when I was doing criticism is I like to, what is this restaurant aiming to be? And then judge them according to what they're trying to hit. So it's not necessarily this large, big picture, what a restaurant should be. It's more, who are these people? What are they trying to create? And how have they hit that mark? So I would say here, I've always done it in a lot more individualized fashion, which I think, you get to hear a lot more voices. You get a lot more diversity in approaching it that way.
Yeah. And apparently Michael Galina, co-owner of Vicia, said that they would participate with Michelin reluctantly.
Yeah.
Right? Even if Michelin did show up in St. Louis?
Yeah. His wife, Tara, actually, with whom I spoke for this story, they co-own the Take Root Hospitality Group. Great folks, great representation of leaving New York, where they could have continued their culinary careers, and coming to St. Louis instead. And they said the reluctance is also because of the fact that there's a lot of pressure, and the environments aren't always great, and that there's so many other ways to judge a restaurant. What you were talking about, Cheryl, with being able to judge a restaurant on the merits that it kind of establishes, I think, is kind of what you're saying there. I think they want the creative freedom to be able to do that. So they would reluctantly participate, because how can you not if you are the type of folks who have your restaurants on these must-dine lists on a regular basis? But speaking of those lists, and having someone like yourself sitting here at the table, Cheryl, they also mentioned the restaurateurs needing more folks, food writers, trusted food writers like yourself, out there and telling the stories of restaurants like theirs, why they came up with these concepts and they're doing what they're doing. Because in a world of influencers and paid media and all this stuff, I mean, Michelin maybe doesn't carry as much as it used to, but people still need recommendations and they still need to learn about this. And so the jobs like what you're doing, they're saying they'd rather have more of you than stars.
I like the job security of that. Right?
And we'll definitely be returning to some of that. We're going to take a very quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to keep talking about St. Louis's status as a food destination and both who and what gives it that status. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to the conversation. Did any St. Louis restaurants earn your personal star of approval this year? And have you feeling like the Michelin man in the very best way possible? What 2024 meal stood out to you and why? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can email us at talk@stlpr.org. We'll be right back. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back. We're talking today about St. Louis's status as a food city, and with me is STLPR morning anchor or newscaster Abby Llorico and St. Louis Magazine food writer Cheryl Baehr. Before the break, we were discussing a feature Abby's written about the Michelin Guide, its system of awarding stars to restaurants, and St. Louis being among many cities that are not in that specific guide. And Cheryl, you kind of gave your take on seeing a Michelin-starred restaurant in St. Louis. So St. Louis does not have any Michelin stars, but it is certainly not for want of spectacular and exciting food. And 2024 showed us just how vibrant our food scene really is. So Cheryl, looking back on 2024, St. Louis restaurants, is there a theme that stood out to you?
I think there were some good things and some concerning things. I'll get the concerning out of the way. I feel like we lost a lot of institutions. Uncle Bill's.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Uncle Bill's. Frank and Helen's. That was actually that was the first restaurant I ever went to as an infant.
Oh.
So that was a very, like, my grandmother knew Helen. So that was a tough personal loss.
Yeah.
So that was difficult. But the thing that I thought was really exciting is that, after the pandemic, everyone was so ready to write off fine dining. We're all going to fast casual. We're all going to QR codes. That is the wave of the future. But I really felt this year that we saw fine dining in these, warm restaurants that had personal service. You sat down, you interacted with someone. That really made a comeback this year, and I thought that was thrilling. Even things like tasting menus, where people said, the tasting menu is dead. They were writing the obituaries of these.
Yeah.
That was something really exciting. Some of the restaurants that opened are really elegant, wonderful places. I think of, Ben Paremba's places in the Del Mar Maker District, like Esca. I mean, Esca's the antithesis of a fast casual QR code restaurant. And it's, to me, the most successful opening of the year. So that was really fun to see that style of dining really is still here.
And Abby, you're returning to St. Louis. I mean, was there something that stood out to you about the food scene here after spending some time away?
Esca's a great mention, and that whole Del Mar Maker District in general, that area is wonderful. Also, one of the first brunches I got, DC has a big brunch scene, so I needed to try to continue that a little bit, especially upon my first return. Going to 21C and having brunch at the Idle Wolf was like, oh, this is a part in downtown that sometimes people don't go to on weekends as much. And now it's like seeing something like that being invested in. It's really neat to see that, and exactly that, Cheryl, the experiential, like, let's just go and enjoy ourselves. But I love a tasting menu because I don't have to make decisions.
Exactly.
That's my favorite thing.
And we have Francis calling from Olivet. Francis, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you guys?
Oh, we're doing well. Tell us what is on your mind.
I just wanted to add this quickly. Me and my girlfriend, we had tried out a restaurant called Wright's Tavern last year, and it was the best dining experience that we've ever had. It was the closest thing to a Michelin-starred restaurant. I'm not lucky enough to have ever gone to one, but this is what I imagine one would be. Just the ambiance from, like, when you walked into the restaurant to the waiters and all the food. It was so delicious. It was just the best experience ever.
And what is it that you ordered there?
I ordered a steak, and my girlfriend got a pasta. But the part that stands out to me is we tried oysters for the first time, and my girlfriend is very against seafood. But just from the way that it was presented, it looked appealing to where she would even like to try it. And we both enjoyed it.
Oh, great. Well, Francis, thank you so much for calling it and sharing your thoughts with us. And again, Francis from Olivet was talking about Wright's Tavern, which is in Clayton. So,
Francis, we should have gotten his tips for getting a reservation, because I think that's worth mentioning, is that sometimes I haven't been able to get a table there yet.
Yeah,
it's been on my list since coming back.
And you were nodding too, Cheryl.
Wright's is just, we were talking about fine dining not being dead. Wright's is such an exquisite restaurant. I hope that if Francis gets the chance to go back, he tries the crab cake, because that is what they're known for. Although they now have a grocery store next door called Box Hill Grocers, where you can get the crab cakes if you can't get into the restaurant.
Okay,
So,
good tip.
Good tip.
Yeah. Of all the food and drink that you enjoyed in 2024, and I know that there's quite a bit of it, Cheryl, was there anything that took you by surprise?
I would say I expected Pavilion, Nick Bognar's restaurant within a restaurant.
Yeah.
It's at Sado on the Hill. I expected it to be wonderful. I don't think I expected it to be the level that it is. I mean, maybe I should have, but you want to talk about a restaurant that, if there was a Michelin guide here, to me, I've never had seafood the way that it was prepared, and I've had great seafood. I was blown away.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. And that really, I would say, whether it took me by surprise, it took my breath away, for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
Can you tell us about one of the elements, like something that you ate?
Yes. So he actually it's a very intimate tasting menu experience. 6 seats. He is preparing everything for you course by course. So he actually had a whole tuna loin, and we did a tasting of all of the different tunas. We did the lean, the medium, and the fatty tuna. And he would actually take it, he would slice it off the loin for you. He would present it right there to you. And it was just so interesting because not only was it delicious, but you learned about the differences. You could see it. You could see where he was cutting it. So it was kind of this all sensory experience being there. And I mean, I've never had tuna like that in my life. And here we are in the middle of the Midwest. It's so exciting.
Right.
It's really exciting what the level that we're able to achieve.
Yeah. And out in St. Louis County, we have Eric calling in. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. We have some great places here. I was sitting at Niche, which I'm sorry is not along anymore, one of Gerard Kraft, one of the best young chefs in America's place. And a guy that's sitting next to him was the head of food and wine at the Peninsula in Chicago. And he, at that point in time, said, we have some of the best places in town. I'm going to give you a couple of my favorites. Brasserie, also by Gerard Kraft. Menu Rui, one of the best young chefs in America at Menu Rui, is phenomenal. And then Jimmy Fiala, you just can't beat Jimmy at the Crossing and at Acero, I think. And so we just need to help get the word out, let people know what's really going on. And also the places you mentioned, like Esca. Phenomenal places and phenomenal chefs. And I think we just need to do a better job of getting the word out.
Yeah. How do you make your dining choices? Who are your guides if it's not Michelin?
Well, I've been to the French Laundry. I don't look at Michelin, really. I don't make a choice by that. I read a lot of local places. I used to use Zagat a lot. I haven't been traveling as much as I used to, but I used to use Zagat. And I use the New York Times 36 Hours book sometimes just for these local places that are really cool, too. And I read lots of people. I read The Sauce. I read Feast. I read St. Louis Magazine. I'm a big fan of Sarah's, and her new newsletters that they're now putting out are phenomenal.
So it sounds like you're a voracious reader and a voracious eater. Thank you, Eric, for calling.
I love data and information, yeah. And your show, you're a jewel in the crown also.
Oh, thank you so much. And we also have Paris, who is calling from St. Louis. Paris, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this discussion.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Well, I had an opportunity to go to the French Laundry in California for a friend's birthday. So we all flew out, and it was, such a special event. And so I wanted to share I think I've heard a lot of discussion around sort of the quality of the food and how delicious restaurants are in St. Louis, which I certainly agree. I think what I would add about having gone to a Michelin-starred restaurant is the experience, or the service, the ambiance. Like, it really felt like a really special place to be, and not a place you might go, on a weekly basis for a delicious meal, but maybe a once in a lifetime, or a milestone birthday. And so there's something about the service, and we got to tour the kitchen, and it was so clean, and so everything was so orderly. It was just really cool to see it. It was sort of an experience of a lifetime, one that I won't forget.
Paris, thank you so much for calling and sharing with us today. Now, in our last minute, we ended the year with some beloved restaurants shutting their doors for good. And there was actually a flurry of them just in the last couple of days. Cheryl, what losses hit you the hardest and why?
Well, as I mentioned, Frank and Helen's, such a personal loss. The one that kind of flew under the radar is U City Grill. I don't know if you all are, I see you're nodding, familiar with that. What a lovely place, and I mean, quirky in the best of ways. You didn't know when it was open. The customer service was, maybe they weren't effusive in their hospitality, but that was the charm of the place. And, I just feel like those little places, that one is a loss that really hits hard for me.
Yeah.
Is there one place, very quickly, about 30 seconds?
Well, rather than mention a place, I would just say what Eric was talking about. It's up to us. Whether it's a Michelin Guide type restaurant that would get the attention of St. Louis's Michelin Guide, or something that's like maybe just the mom and pop place. It's up to us to try to keep too many places on that end of, we don't want to have too many restaurant obituaries in 2025.
Of course.
It's not too soon to start going out.
Abby Llorico is STLPR's morning newscaster, and Cheryl Baehr is a food writer at St. Louis Magazine. Thank you both for joining us today.
Are we going to lunch?
Oh, I hope so.
Oh, I love that.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Llorico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.